Hi, it's nice to meet you.
How you doing, man?
What should I call you?
Something profound, I don't know. Gavin for sure. But don't call me a jerk. I don't like being called a jerk.
When you were diagnosed with dyslexia, how did it feel?
Well, it's interesting. I was diagnosed, but my mother never told me. So for years and years and years, she hid it from me. And it's interesting, it was an interesting way of finding out at least, she worked 2 jobs, so she was single mom, so she wasn't around a lot. And so I remember going upstairs, and it's a way of saying only this, that I went upstairs to her room, and on her desk there was a bunch of papers, and my name was on the paper, and I remember just reading, and then I kept seeing this word dyslexia. And when she got home late that night, I was like, what the heck is this? And what's this thing, dyslexia or this whatever? And she said, oh, I didn't want you to know about that. And this is why you've been going to these classes after school 3 times a day, and why you've been going to these summer things for all these years. And so I found out about it, frankly, by snooping around my mom's paperwork. and she just didn't want me to be stigmatized with it. And so it's an interesting thing, right? Some people feel like it's important to explain why you're struggling. Other people feel like, well, then you'll use it as a crutch, right? Then you can use it as an excuse to say, well, you could give up. She didn't want me to give up by saying, well, I have this thing. And so that was her way of at least that's what she thought was the right thing to do. Anyway, that's how I found out. So it was a really weird thing. And I was like in 5th or 6th, 7th grade. So it was about your age. When did you find out?
I found out when I was in around 3rd grade, so around 8. I found out around then because my mom took me to a class, and so I ended up finding out like some sort of a testing thing, and I couldn't figure out some of the shapes that was going on and stuff. So mom was like, oh, well, there's something wrong here, and the testing person said that it has stealth dyslexia.
I've got 4 kids. 1-year-old, the oldest is 8, and I'm not even making this up. How's this for coincidence? Literally today, she's almost 8, she's 8 next week, 7-year-old, she's getting screened for dyslexia, just coincidental to this day, because she's got all the same issues I have. Now, she may not be, but it will be interesting to find out. But yes, she's getting a sort of official, much earlier screening than I did.
That's cool.
It's hard for parents, Ryan. I think that's what you're going to discover. When you're my age, you're an old man like me and you have kids. I realize now I think it was harder for my mom than it was for me, because I was just who I was. But for my mom, she was trying to, my fancy, smart sister who had it easy and finished her homework and actually read the books she was assigned to reading. And, I was in there in the corner complaining and not able to read and faking it. And that was, I think, more stressful for her. And so, anyway, be sympathetic to your mother is my point.
So, how did you become comfortable with dyslexia? Because sometimes I know it's not easy to be different.
Yeah, I mean, I know I've never been comfortable with it necessarily, because it's still a pain, because there's certain things I can't do. And I'm in the wrong business to not be able to do them, meaning I can't read very well. And when you have to give speeches all the time, which is 4 or 5 days a week, it's hard because you can't read a script. The only time I have to read a speech is during these these conventions where they make you put it in a teleprompter, or they won't let you speak because you can go on too long and everything's scripted, and it's horribly difficult. And so I've never been comfortable with it. I've just overcompensated for it and have learned to develop other skills. I have an ability to memorize things remarkably well. And that's a great gift, because you have to, right? Because you're always having to overcompensate. So as a kid, I was, I couldn't read, so I would listen and I'd hear something 8 times and then I'd memorize it. By the way, this is what my daughter does. She'll literally, like a year ago, I remember reading, we read to her every night, and she starts reading 2 pages perfectly. Those 2 pages, verbatim, like long paragraphs. And I remember as a kid, I remember doing the same thing. I remember the Gettysburg Address 4 and 7 years. I mean, I still memorize it. And so there's weird ways of overcompensating, but it's not necessarily comfortable. It just, you find a different routine. You know, it's an interesting question because, you know, I don't know if there's a comfort in it, but there's an overcompensation.
Yeah, because that's kind of like what I do, because I like memorizing things, and I can't really read them like 100% well. Sometimes I just look at the words that I'm having trouble with, and I just memorize how to say them. And then after that, I can sort of read the rest of it. And sometimes I just memorize the whole thing.
And that's awesome, man, because that's a deeply powerful skill. If you can, you know, if you have that ability where others never had to learn that, right? They didn't have to work on these other skills. And that's what will make you unique. It already has. And, you know, in your future, it's going to give you such an advantage over other people.
You kind of talked about the strategies that you use to help focus, but do you like have any other tips and tricks that you use right now?
Yeah, I mean, so when I read, I'm looking around, there's books everywhere. So I cannot read a book without underlining it. It's like school book. But in my life, I've never read a book. I can't read a newspaper article. I have to underline, because if I don't underline, my mind will I'll read 2 chapters or 10 pages and have no clue. I mean, I just spaced out. And so I just read the word unless I underline. So the only way I can focus is underline. And then what I do after I underline something, because usually even underlining it, I'm not really paying attention, I'll go back and I'll read what I underlined. But the minute I do that, then it's in my head. And so I have this, back to this retention and memorization. And then, you know, and so you just have to read maybe 2 to 3 times what other people would read once. But that 3rd time you read it, then you own it. You own the material, and it's such a huge advantage. So that's one of my big tips, is no one ever lends me a book because I'll destroy it, because I just, you know, big highlights and letters, and I write in the margins of every book, and I circle things and, you know, highlight squares. Honestly, I wish someone would grab me a book from any room. You'd see, but that's without exception, because otherwise reading's impossible for me.
After you found out about dyslexia, did kids like treat you differently? Did you tell them?
No, I never really told them. You know, back in the day, I know now I'm the old man talking to you. You know, it was a different world back there, Ryan. They didn't really talk about dyslexia. No one really knew what was going on, so the teachers weren't particularly, you know, I was the guy in the back parking lot in the temporary shed with the other students. There was no unified education, which we talk about today. They didn't really know how to deal with it. And so I was just the slower student, and I was on a different track. And I was, you know, and because I was part of that group, maybe people made fun of me. I used to have I couldn't speak. When I was a little bit younger than you, I had to go to speech therapy. I had to learn, I just remember, you know, use the tongue, put the tongue out to do TH versus S. And so I just remember going to class, learning that all the time. So I was made fun then when I couldn't really speak well. I was shy beyond words. It's not even funny. I'm still shy, but, you know, I have to get over that in politics. So that's hard. But I was always the guy in the back of the room, never in the front of the room, always with my head down, always looking at the clock going, please, 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 don't call on me, don't call on me, don't call on me. And my stomach getting more and more nervous, especially if they, you know, rows of desks and everyone had to read a paragraph, and then you're doing the math and you're looking at the clock and you're like, okay, maybe we're almost at recess. And then they call you, and I remember Mr. Morris's class, I'll never forget. It's like 5th or 6th grade, where I did get up and read, and everyone laughed because I literally couldn't read. And that's, you know, that was just wrong of the teacher to do that, I thought, just to make me, knowing that I couldn't read. But beyond that, you know, they just made fun of me generally, just, you know, the bullying, you know, you always have that.
Did you go to different schools, or did you stay?
Yeah, I stayed in the same school, but sort of the separate track. I mean, quite literally, I'm not kidding. It was like these temporary shacks. I still at Hall Middle School, I still see it. Redwood High School still has them in my high school, where I went to like 3 or 4 classes a day there, and everybody else was over here. But I did these after. I mean, we were lucky. I mean, my mom was a single mom. She didn't come from any real money. She passed away like 18 years ago, literally. And I only say this to make a point. She literally left $5,600 for my sister and I. And I'm only making the point that she really struggled all her life, and she didn't come from any wealth or money. She just worked hard, and the only thing that mattered for her was raising her kids. And so she made the money that allowed me to get the support. And had she not, candidly, provided that support for those after-school programs or those summer programs, I guarantee you I wouldn't be here today. And so for me, a big part of what I want to focus on is, for people that can't afford that kind of support, what the heck do we do for them? And that's the overwhelming majority of people with a learning disability, attention deficit, and all kinds of learning issues, that they don't get that support. And they're extraordinarily gifted people. They just, they need to discover that, and they need the help to discover that. And that's why it's so important. We can't allow that talent to go unmined, so to speak. We need to develop people and provide the support and resources, and I know that's why we're here.
So, yeah, I want to be president when I grow up.
Why? You actually want to be president?
Yeah.
Good job, man. Good for you. President's, it's a pretty good gig. I think the best job in the world is ex-president. That's my personal opinion.
So, I was wondering, do you write your speeches, or you do totally improv?
Total improv, man. I don't write. I mean, I'll write out, I write out notes on 8.5 by 11 pieces of paper. So I'll read, I'll underline, and then I'll take what I underline and put it on white pages, and then write it. And then I'll circle those things, and I'll break it down into smaller pieces. And then in those small pieces is the speech. And by the time I go through that entire process, it's pretty much all up here. So giving a speech is really challenging because, I joke with my staff, for every minute I give a speech, literally, I know this sounds ridiculously overstated, and if it's overstated, I'm barely exaggerating. For every 1 minute I give a speech, there's close to an hour of preparation, which is ridiculous. So in a 30-minute speech, imagine 30 hours of trying to do it. And you say, well, that's not possible. I'm telling you, I'm literally not exaggerating. It's about the equivalent of that. And that's why I say it's like when you say, well, how did you get comfortable with dyslexia? I'm not, that's a lot of work that I wish I didn't have to do, that I see my opponents in politics or my colleagues in politics, someone literally hands them a script and they read it. And I'm like, man, I'm jealous. I wish I could just do that and spend 3 minutes delivering something versus the 3 hours it took to give the 3-minute, how are you speech. So there's just a lot of work, but the work pays off, but it's a lot. It's a lot. So it's interesting. I mean, watching, and I think, look, for being president, it's really interesting because you got to read. I mean, it's a teleprompter job so much, right? It's, you have to read those speeches nonstop. It's interesting, and it's not I'm not getting partisan here. It's interesting to watch Trump. I mean, I think, he struggles to read, but he's probably the least teleprompter president we've had. Obama was, there's clearly a guy who doesn't have dyslexia. Give me a break. I mean, that he could read like no one could read. That just was jaw-dropping, his ability to read. If you're going to be president, be the first dyslexia president without a teleprompter. I kind of like that. And just do everything extemporaneous. But you can't screw up in diplomacy. So you got to be careful. That's a tough gig.
If you looked back when you were around my age, what would you say to yourself to keep you on task and motivated?
I think the hardest part for me at your age, quite literally your age, 12, 13, 14, was I got really frustrated all the time. Like frustrated. And that's the word I think about. That was the emotion, the feeling. It's like, I'd throw the pen down, or I can't do this, I can't do this, sort of bad attitude. I'm stupid. And my mom always hated when I said that. I'm stupid, or but I felt kind of stupid. I couldn't spell, couldn't read, couldn't write, was shy. My head was always down, and so it was hard. And so just the frustration. Learn just to be patient, and you don't have to be perfect. and make mistakes. I mean, I don't know that my mother ever said it was okay to make mistakes. And so I would love to tell myself, make mistakes. And enjoy making mistakes. And if I could go back and if someone told me it's okay to make mistakes, that would be so much more relaxing because I was good at making mistakes, but I never wanted to, right? Right? It's kind of like you don't want to ask the question because you don't want to sound stupid, or you don't want to answer because you're afraid of appearing a certain way. And if someone just said, who cares? That would have been a pretty powerful thing if I had only known. My admonition to you is ready, fire, aim. Mistakes are a portal of discovery. You miss 100% of the shots you don't take. Fail forward fast, and enjoy the process.
All right. Thank you.
When you're president, don't forget me, man.